Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Premiers from across Western Canada met in British Columbia to discuss issues that are impacting many of our provinces. We have an exclusive interview with Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, who explains how the Trudeau government's latest carbon tax on July 1st will impact Canadians. And a protest took place at the Lethbridge School Division. We hear the concerns from parents.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Premiers from across Western Canada met in Whistler, British Columbia to discuss a number of issues which are impacting our provinces. Issues such as energy security, labour markets, and immigration. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith also addressed how her party is trying to protect Albertans from devastating wildfires and floods.
Part of what we just went through an historic fire season, and part of the thing that we need to concentrate on is how do we build fire guards for community and be proactive for that. We also know that with flooding, there's infrastructure we need to build to make communities more resilient against flooding. Those are the two biggest risks that we face in our province. Some of those require just major infrastructure investments. So I'd be curious to see what they would have in mind. I mean, I'm prepared to work with the federal government on things that make sense for Alberta. What makes sense for Alberta, since we are a natural gas basin and we are a hydrocarbon fueled economy, is working on carbon capture, utilization and storage, working on hydrogen, working with our partners in British Columbia in particular on exporting LNG so that we can reduce emissions around the world.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, meanwhile, addressed immigration concerns. He says his province is now seeing the largest influx of new residents in over 100 years.
In Saskatchewan, we're growing at our fastest rate from a population perspective that we have in 108 years, over a century, since we've grown at the rate that we are. And I think that's true in many of the western provinces. And so there is concerns, I think, at least from Saskatchewan's perspective and likely others, around fair and equitable treatment, investing in the settlement services, for example, of new immigrants, including Ukrainian immigrants that are coming to our communities.
Manitoba Premier Heather Stephenson discussed how her province is dealing with a shortage of healthcare workers.
I talked about our Health Human Resource Action Plan, which is about recruiting, retaining, and training more healthcare professionals, really aligning what is needed with post-secondary institutions, as well on the training side, looking at immigration as a tool there. Recently, we just we signed on with the Philippines. We signed more than 300 healthcare professionals to come to the province of Manitoba. These are some of the things that we're looking at doing and breaking down the barriers for those that are trained elsewhere and looking at recognizing their credentials as well.
You can add Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas to the list of Conservative politicians who are concerned about the second Trudeau carbon tax, which is kicking in on Canada Day. Thomas says our Prime Minister's policies have consistently been hurting Canadians.
I think it comes down to this. I think we have a Prime Minister who is much more interested in upholding his ideology than he is in listening to common sense. He's more in tune with himself and his goals than he is with the needs of Canadians. And I think, we're seeing that in a myriad of areas, but this is definitely one of them. Adding a second carbon tax is going to drive up the cost of living for Canadians. Based on an independent review that was done on it plus the first carbon tax, so both combined, are going to add an additional $4,000 per year in expenses to the average Canadian household.
Make sure you catch the full one-on-one interview with Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas and myself coming up after business news. The province announced that it is offering more support for more than 20,000 low-income post-secondary students. As of today, those who qualify for the Alberta Student Grant will receive up to $5,100 in non-repayable funding support. Officials say monthly support payments will rise from $250 to $425 per month. They would take effect for the 2023 to 2024 academic school year. The Alberta Student Grant applications for the upcoming academic year are now open. Around 50 people gathered outside of the Lethbridge School Division Education Centre on Tuesday to protest SOGI, otherwise known as Sexual Identity and Gender Orientation Curriculum. A public forum was held last night with residents gathering outside, voicing their concerns for the curriculum.
We've seen that this is Pride Month, but really it should have been called Transgender Month, because this is something very radical and new being pushed into our society, the whole society, but especially into our school system, where the subject of, do you feel comfortable in the gender or that you were born? The school system is entrapping kids into a process that may set them against their parents.
Meanwhile, a member with the Lethbridge School Division Board of Trustees say they've been hearing the concerns from parents and residents and says the SOGI or SOGI policy was developed back in 2016 and then later revised in 2018. Alison Purcell talks about some of the concerns they've been hearing.
Some of the concerns are that we need to ensure that we have a policy in place so that we are protecting our LGBTQ community, as well as concerns that what is being taught in our classrooms that might be in that area of concern, as well as what does safety look like in our schools. Of course, as a school division, we support all of our students, and it's really important that all of our students feel protected within our school buildings.
Purcell says they continue to have conversations with all stakeholders and encourage anyone who has concerns about the division's policies to come forward. Well, we enjoyed another beautiful hot summer day here in Lethbridge, and that trend will continue over the next few days. Angela Stewart is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Angela, for those planning outdoor activities this Canada Day weekend, it should be sunny and hot.
Yes, Canada Day is expected to be very warm. It's going to be very hot over the weekend nonetheless. So it's going to be, I would say, a great time to get out and enjoy those temperatures. As for tonight, going to be kind of experiencing a chance of rain. And then that's also the case for tomorrow as well. We're going to be sitting at a low of 14 degrees. And tomorrow expected to shoot up to 32 degrees, but with that chance of rain, like I mentioned, and sitting at a low of 15 for Thursday. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. The city says they've been hearing some concerns surrounding the new play space currently being built at Galt Gardens here in Lethbridge. Some of the main concerns include safety, cost for the build, and issues surrounding behaviors happening in the park. An official with the city talks about some of the ways they plan to mitigate those concerns once the play space is completed.
We're definitely aware of a lot of the issues that we're seeing in there. There was some encampment enforcement that was done a few weeks ago. We've actually increased our cleaning capacity within the park between our Clean Sweep program and our parks crews. And we're also having parks do some additional work within the park to create better sight lines and those types of things to really help with the feeling of safety and to encourage people to come in and utilize the park.
Construction on the new play space will take place over the summer, and the city anticipates it'll be ready for use sometime in the fall. The final numbers have been tallied for the 2023 Lethbridge Municipal Census. New figures show that our city has grown to 106,550 people. This marks a rise of 5,068 people, which is an almost 5% increase from 2019. The largest area of Lethbridge was the west side, with 43,793 residents. The north side has 29,448, and the south side of the city, 33,309 people. Lethbridge Councillor Belinda Crowson says it's great news to be able to increase our population here in Lethbridge.
As was mentioned, thank you to the residents who took the time to make sure that every single person was counted. This continues to show the growth of Lethbridge, and it's always nice to be ahead of Red Deer.
The census collection period was from April 1st through the 23rd. The data collected helped to determine the number of people living in each household, along with their age and sex. Lethbridge City Council voted unanimously in approving a new shelter development strategy to address our city's homeless population. The main goals for the city are to clarify their involvement in shelter development and identify opportunities to ensure there's land available that is zoned for the shelter. Officials also want to ensure there is shelter capacity to house those experiencing homelessness here in our city. Angela Sundquist, the manager of the Fairway Plaza McDonald's here in Lethbridge, is one of the lucky recipients of the 2023 Outstanding Manager of the Year Awards. The honor is given out to only the top 5% of managers working across more than 1,400 McDonald's restaurants in Canada. Sundquist says she was over the moon when she got the call.
When I first found out about it, my operation consultant was here. My owner operator was here. I was not expecting it at all. I got a phone call from Les Hudgens, and he just congratulating me. And for me, it's, I did not even know that I was nominated for it at all. So it was a big surprise and a big achievement for me and for my team. Like I always say, when I win something, I always win it with my team. So I called every single one of them, give them the good news, and it's really exciting.
Congratulations. Sundquist began her career at McDonald's 20 years ago and has been a manager here in Lethbridge since 2019. There are many options to celebrate Canada Day this weekend throughout southern Alberta. A favorite road trip destination is the Crow's Nest Pass, and why not with the beautiful mountains? It's no wonder as well with the hiking trails, gorgeous views, and rich history such as the Frank Slide. Joey Ambrosi with the Frank Slide Interpretive Centre has a tip on where the hotspot for festivities will be in the pass.
Crow's Nest Pass made up of 5 towns: Hillcrest, Bellevue, Frank, Larimore, and Coleman. Canada Day is Coleman's big day, and they have a great parade on Canada Day, plus lots of events all through the day. And I know this weekend, for the first time, they're having a First Nations craft sale at the Crow's Nest Museum, and there's lots of other heritage and sort of natural history things to do down in the area on Canada Day.
By the way, the Frank Slide Interpretive Centre is open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. Alert's Internet Child Exploitation Team has arrested 8 people in connection with a huge child exploitation ring in southern Alberta. Nearly 1 million child sexual exploitation photos and videos have been identified by Alert since the investigation began back in April. More than 35 computers and electronics were seized, which means that terabytes worth of data will now have to be analyzed by forensics technicians. 7 men from Calgary and a man from Colehurst were all charged with making and distributing child pornography. A massive investment of $50 million has been given to the new Calgary Cancer Centre from the Arthur J.E. Child Foundation. The centre is now officially named Arthur J.E. Child Comprehensive Cancer Centre in honor of the donation. The building sits next to the Foothills Medical Centre. Arthur J.E. Child was a philanthropist known for his generosity and passion for helping people. He received the Order of Canada back in 1985 following his work in the business, military, and public service sector. Staff with the Alberta Cancer Foundation told us how important this new cancer centre is going to be for patients who are battling the deadly disease.
What I would say is that cancer treatments have come so far and they continue to advance. But every day in this province, 60 people hear the words, "You have cancer." And so there is still a huge need, despite the advancements, to find better ways to treat and detect cancers. And this donation will be the lifeblood for some really important research and innovation that will happen at the new Arthur Child Comprehensive Cancer Centre when it opens its doors in about a year.
This announcement comes after the Alberta government said this new facility would come at a cost of $1.4 billion. The $50 million donation represents the largest gift to cancer care and research in Alberta's history. The centre will fully open in 2024. Some sad news to pass along to you right now. A man who was a signature in Calgary radio for 20 years has passed away. Dan Carson, who was part of Country 105's Odd Squad, has died. Robin Adair from the radio station made the announcement Wednesday on social media. Not only was Dan part of the morning show at Country 105, but he was also a voice you heard at the Calgary Stampede football games and McMahon Stadium. Carson was a longtime Calgarian, but actually began his radio career in Smithers, British Columbia at the tender age of 16. Now, there are reports that he died from a heart attack, but his family has not revealed the exact cause of his death. Dan Carson leaves behind his 2 children. Debris from the Titan submersible has made its return to land. Twisted chunks of the 22-foot submersible were unloaded at a pier of the Canadian Coast Guard on Wednesday. Officials say analyzing the physical material of the debris could reveal some very important clues as to the fate of the Titan. The U.S. Coast Guard convened a Marine Board of Investigation into the implosion. That is the highest level of investigation that can be conducted by the service branch. A Russian missile attack at a popular pizza restaurant in eastern Ukraine killed at least 11 people, including 3 teenagers. A survivor said they had no advanced warning.
Completely unexpected, no sign, no sound. At one moment, immediately came a very, 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 very hard boom. And it was the strike of the rocket which we did not expect at all at that location. We've been in other locations where we could expect huge boom, people running, everything dropping down, glass. It was extreme.
The war between Ukraine and Russia will be entering its 17th month. A recent Angus Reid poll said there was a 7% drop in how Canadians view religious people's contributions to society. Dr. Andrew Bennett, Faith Communities Program Director at Cardis, says people may be unaware as to how religious groups show their faith through action.
Sometimes there's a perception amongst some in our country and in our communities that religious people are sort of part of these exclusive clubs. And what they do in their churches or their synagogues or their mosques or their gurdwaras, it's just for them. When in fact, religious people don't just engage in public worship simply for their own benefit. What happens is that when they engage in public worship in these buildings that dot our communities, they then take that out into the community and seek to live it out in ways that are for the benefit of all citizens.
Dr. Bennett also shares with BCN's Jeanette Rocher how recovery of tolerance is needed in today's society. That's coming up in the second half of our program. The Rio Grande Valley is deep in the heart of Texas. It is a border region that is receiving thousands of immigrants who are seeking refuge or asylum. The Texas River Ministry is doing missionary trips to the border so churches can respond when people are experiencing a spiritual crisis. We have more now in this report.
Every day here we try to attend to as many migrants as we can.
Están regalando una Biblia. Están regalando lo más importante que es la palabra del Señor.
We provide things for them. And we also, when we're open at the church, we provide a refuge center for migrants to stay for one night until they get to their final destination.
En el nombre de Jesús. Amén. Le damos un fuerte aplauso al Señor, pues.
We provide food, we provide clothing, we provide New Testaments, hygiene kits.
Que Dios la bendiga.
Dios la bendiga, chico.
Gracias.
And we present Christ to them, and so far we've seen thousands, tens of thousands come to know Christ. We've at the place where we've had about 1,500 stay with us, and all of them have accepted Christ, or they were already Christians when they got to us.
Que Dios la bendiga.
One young lady who had to be here for a long time, she actually went through our program and got baptized.
Ánimo, adelante.
Gracias.
Donde ustedes pueden ir a bañarse, a cambiarse, a descansar, y yo les traigo de regreso con mucho gusto por acá.
When they come to us at our place, we have a place of about 15, 20 people can stay. We keep them overnight, and then the next morning we provide transportation back here. But we provide their meals for them while they're there. We provide a place for them to shower, a place to rest, a place to get out of that terrible situation that they were in, and all of a sudden realize that they're in the United States and it's going to be different for them.
Tú los has traído con tu paz y con tu bendición. Cuida de su viaje, llévalos hasta su destino final con cuidado en Cristo Jesús. Amén. Gracias.
Amazing work they're doing in Texas. Well, if you're planning a weekend getaway to the mountains this Canada Day weekend, it should be great weather for it. A full look at the weather forecast is on deck. You know, a pretty nice weekend is shaping up here in southwestern Alberta for so many of the Canada Day festivities as we get ready to celebrate our country's 156th birthday. Angela Stewart is in now with all of the weather details. Angela, before that, however, there's a slight chance of maybe some rain developing?
Yes, there is a slight chance of rain expected. That rain is going to carry into tomorrow as well, where there is a risk of a thunderstorm expected for Thursday. But as the rest of the week goes on, that's when we're seeing that sunshine and those high temperatures going to be reaching about low 30s, 31, 32 for Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday 20 degrees, but still lots of sunshine. And then to start our week up next week, partly cloudy conditions, but still beautiful nonetheless, 23, 26 for Monday, Tuesday there. Our average high for this time of year is 24 degrees. Our average low is 10. Highest temperature was 34 degrees recorded back on this day in 1984. Lowest temperature was 0 back in 1946. Our sun rose at 5:26 this morning, expected to set at 9:43. That'll put us at about 16 hours and 17 minutes of daylight. Okay, temperatures across the country now for Thursday, Vancouver and Victoria. Beautiful conditions, 22, 21. It's going to be feeling slightly cooler near the water, near the Juan de Fuca Strait, feeling more like 18. Edmonton, Calgary, 29 and 30, risk of a thunderstorm. And keep in mind, Calgary is also under heat warning, which is expected to probably last for a couple of days. Nothing really to complain about in Saskatoon or Regina, 27, 26 for tomorrow. 23, chance of rain tomorrow for the rest of the prairies in Winnipeg. So keep that in mind. There's also a risk of a thunderstorm there. To the central part of the country now. For tomorrow, Toronto, they're going to be under some hazy conditions, some local smoke to keep in mind. That's kind of the same deal in Ottawa and Montreal, but Montreal is going to be seeing those wetter conditions with the rain. About a 30% chance expected there. So just keep that in mind as you are heading out tomorrow if you are in any of these regions. For Atlantic Canada, that's kind of where we're seeing those wet, cooler conditions. Rain in a majority of these regions, as you can see across the board, 20, 19, and 24 for Charlottetown, and then 25 in St. John's for tomorrow. And there you have it. That's your full weather forecast.
Indigo is reporting a $50 million loss in its last fiscal year. Officials believe its highly publicized cybersecurity incident hit the company pretty hard. The book retailer still posted revenue, however, of just over $1 billion last year. Now, that was a decline of 0.4% or $4.6 million from the previous year. Company officials say the retailer's numbers for the fourth quarter were heavily impacted by the ransomware attack. The company is yet to come up with a financial tally for the cyber attack, but officials say it'll be in the millions of dollars. One expert is calling Postmedia's merger talks with Nordstar Capital, owner of Metroland and the Toronto Star, as a Hail Mary pass. Carleton University journalism professor Dwayne Winsick says a potential merger would legitimize consolidation. He says it would also divert attention away from the companies that have played in creating the conditions that have left their products in a poor state of affairs. He says Canada's media landscape has been decimated by a combination of bad decision-making, the rise of big tech, and economic downturns. Police say they raided a number of buildings involved in cybercrime and freed more than 2,700 workers in the Philippines. They say the workers were from more than a dozen countries and had been swindled into working for fraudulent online gaming sites and other cybercrime groups. Cybercrime scams have become a major issue in Asia, with reports of people being lured into taking jobs, but then find themselves trapped in virtual slavery. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 85 points on the day to finish at 19,818. The Dow was down 212 points to 33,926. The S&P 500 was down just over a point today to 4376. And the Nasdaq was up 36 points to 13,591. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.86 to $69.56 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was down 16 cents to $2.60 U.S. Gold was down $6.36 on the day to $19.0733 U.S. an ounce, and silver was even at $22.70 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.29 per bushel. Barley's at $9.14. Canola's at $16.10, and corn is at $10.24 per bushel. Live cattle were up 33 cents to $179.63. Feeder cattle August contract was up $1.75 to $240.25, and lean hogs July contract was up 15 cents to $94.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.44 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, the final numbers have been tallied for the 2023 Lethbridge Municipal Census. New figures show that our city has grown to 106,550 people. This marks a rise of 5,068 people, which is an almost 5% increase from 2019. The largest area of Lethbridge was the west side, with 43,793 people. The north side has 29,448, and the south side of the city has 33,309 people. You know, there's a lot of concern that you may no longer be able to get a lot of your local news from news outlets such as BCN on social media platforms like Facebook, thanks to the Liberals passing a bill C-18. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas will explain shortly and how that will impact you and many other Canadians. If you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you. A number of Canadians are still struggling to pay their mortgages, their rent, struggling at the pumps, and struggling to put food on their tables. Visits to food banks across Canada are at all-time highs. Now, to talk about a lot of the struggles Canadians and Albertans are facing right now is Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas. She joins us from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Now, Rachel, the Trudeau government's second carbon tax is also kicking us while we're down right now. I mean, it's not making life any easier for so many of us. Why isn't the message getting across to our Prime Minister that Canadians really need a break right now?
Yeah, Hal, I think it's an excellent question and certainly one that I'm hearing a lot about from constituents. I think it comes down to this. You know, I think we have a Prime Minister who is much more interested in upholding his ideology than he is in listening to common sense. He's more in tune with himself and his goals than he is with the needs of Canadians. And I think, you know, we're seeing that in a myriad of areas, but this is definitely one of them. Adding a second carbon tax is going to drive up the cost of living for Canadians. And you know, based on an independent review that was done on it, it plus the first carbon tax, so both combined, are going to add an additional $4,000 per year in expenses to the average Canadian household, which is a significant amount of cost, as you can imagine. And so, you know, just even in my office, I've had individuals come in who, you know, are telling me they're having to make choices between putting food on their table versus paying for medication versus being able to pay their home heating bill. You know, I think there's this feeling of you know, desperation and a bit of hopelessness, and people just feeling disempowered by the, you know, massive skyrocketing cost of living that they're experiencing and just the overall challenges that are hitting them at the moment.
Rachel, let's talk about Bill C-18 for just a moment here. It passed through the Senate, received royal assent, and it'll put the state squarely in the newsroom of our country, including here at Bridge City News. And many people argue that it hinders journalistic independence while removing choices from Canadians. Can you explain why?
Sure. So at the heart of Bill C-18 is this idea that news outlets would be able to enter into negotiations with platforms such as Facebook and Google. And out of those negotiations, Facebook and Google would then compensate news sources for the links that are put online and made available to the public. But the problem with this is of course, that then, first off, the CRTC, which is directed by the government, will have to determine which news sources are eligible to enter into these negotiations and which ones aren't. So essentially, it's, you know, some outlets will get a state stamp of approval and then other outlets will not get the state stamp of approval. So you're putting the government squarely in the newsroom. And then the other thing that's happening here is you're putting tech giants also in the newsroom. So tech giants will enter into negotiations with these news outlets. And of course, those tech giants will have demands as well. So they'll want certain types of news to be produced or certain stories told or certain angles taken. And in order for these negotiations to be upheld, those demands will have to be met. Which means then, really, at the end of the day, you don't have independent media anymore. You then have state-directed media and media, you know, directed by big tech companies, which of course poses massive problems for Canadians because they want to be able to trust the stories that they're being told. But when the newsroom is being directed by government and big tech giants, just how truthful is it, and how much can those stories really be trusted? And so there's just huge implications in terms of journalistic independence, and of course, you know, to what extent Canadians can trust the stories that are being communicated to them.
You know, we've even seen censorship as well regarding some of the interviews we do when it comes to COVID-19 vaccine injuries. We put it on our YouTube channel, ban. We got slapped with a ban. We're off of YouTube for a week. I'm like, what? What's going on here, right? Yeah, it's one strike against you. So we have to end up using platforms like Rumble, you know, and BitChute, and some of the other ones as well. Now, Rachel, we recently celebrated National Indigenous Peoples Day, yet so many First Nations people we chat with say in order to really work towards reconciliation, we need to do a better job of providing clean drinking water in so many First Nations communities here in our country. Why are we failing in that regard?
Yeah. Oh, man. It's such an important question because, again, I think we see the prime minister and his government, speaking according to ideology, but unfortunately their actions don't align. And so on the one side, he'll say that there's no greater relationship or no relationship more important than that than the relationship with Indigenous folks. And then at the same time, though, there's this incredible neglect that's taking place with regards to just providing these basic necessities of life. I mean, in many areas, it is easier to access government-sanctioned safe supply drugs than it is clean drinking water. In what world does that make sense? I mean, that is certainly not the Canada that most people I speak to want to live in. That is not the reality we want to call home. And certainly when I speak with Indigenous leaders in our area, that is not what they want either. They want their people to live in safe communities. They want their people to have access to the basic necessities of life. They do not want the government to facilitate easier access to drugs. And so really, I think we're looking at a government that has its priorities all wrong.
Now, your leader, Pierre Poilievre, says he's ready to work with other parties to help launch an independent, nonpartisan public inquiry into Beijing's interference with our federal elections. How's that coming along?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been quite the story. It's certainly been unfolding for the last 6 months or so. And that is, of course, with regard to Beijing interfering in Canada's elections, both in 2019 and 2021. There is substantial evidence of this nature. Recently we heard from the chief of staff to the prime minister. Her name is Katie Telford. She came to committee a couple of months ago, and she testified that the prime minister receives everything. Nothing is withheld. And the second statement she made is that the prime minister reads everything. Nothing is ignored. So if he receives everything and he reads everything, then there's just simply no way that he wasn't aware of election interference. And so that being the case, we can only conclude that he has been misleading Canadians and trying to cover up, which means that ultimately Canadians deserve a public inquiry. They deserve a neutral third party to investigate this and to get to the bottom of it. And the reason why this is so important is because ultimately we're a democratic country and we depend on free and fair elections. And so if there's a foreign actor that is interfering, then Canadians deserve to know that and the impact that has had. That said, I think there's certainly evidence to suggest that the Liberals don't want this. We know based on testimony that they benefited significantly from this interference, that it's partially responsible for keeping them in power. And so I understand why they're hesitant to do what Canadians are asking. But at the end of the day, as government, they have a responsibility to make sure that they abide by the will of Canadians. The vast majority want an investigation completed. And so here we are, and we're waiting. As the Conservative Party of Canada, Mr. Poilievre has made it very clear that he is ready to go, and he's just simply waiting for the government to hit the big red button and say that they're going to do it. And then we're happy to play ball. And so we have suggestions in terms of what that study needs to look like in terms of reference. And also we have suggestions with regards to who those neutral third parties might be.
Rachel, how damning could this be for the Prime Minister, an inquiry like this? Or some people refer to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as the Teflon man because nothing really sticks to him.
Well, I think Canadians are going to be the ones to determine the answer to that question. Ultimately, it's going to be up to them to hold him to account. And so it's my hope that Canadians have had enough. They've obviously watched as this Prime Minister has tried to skirt various issues throughout his time as leader of this country. They've watched as he has misled Canadians. He has tried to cover up, and he has multiple ethics breaches against his name. And so it's my hope that Canadians would see his conduct and that they would vote accordingly. And ultimately, I would make the argument that based on his behavior, based on his decisions, he does not deserve to be a leader of this country. And in particular, with regards to the foreign interference, we have a prime minister who was aware of Beijing's interference both in the 2019 and 2021 elections and chose to turn a blind eye. Canadians, I think, are rightly concerned by that. And I think now is the time to choose a different path for our country, which means a different leader.
Are we any closer, though, to a federal election? Is NDP leader Jagmeet Singh any closer to pulling the plug on the coalition so Canadians will have the chance to maybe vote the Trudeau Liberals out, or is it just going to be status quo till 2025?
Again, a really great question, Hal. Yeah, and fair enough, right? Unfortunately, the NDP has been very cozy with the Liberals and is responsible for holding them in power. We've had, multiple non-confidence votes come forward, and unfortunately, because the NDP have reinforced the Liberal Party, they've been able to maintain power, and therefore, Justin Trudeau remains our Prime Minister. Will that shift anytime soon? I guess I would. My observations would be that the coalition is quite cozy. That there doesn't seem to be too much of an indication of fracturing, and so I suppose we could be waiting until at least 2024, if not 2025, before we see an election.
Now, you said that it was outrageous that one of the worst serial killers in Canadian history was transferred from a maximum to a medium security prison under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's watch. Rachel, how did that happen?
Yeah, so basically, Mr. Mendicino is the Minister for Public Safety, and it's his responsibility to read the notifications that come across his desk and to either, sign off on them or halt them. In this case, unfortunately, it went forward that Mr. Bernardo was moved from a high security prison to a medium security prison. And this is, as you said, this is, one of Canada's greatest serial killers, someone who certainly doesn't deserve to be in a medium security prison, but rather someone who should be kept in max security at all times for the remainder of his life. And really what that comes down to is the safety and security of Canadians and ultimately advocating for victims. Sadly, Mr. Mendicino chose to put the criminal ahead of the victims in this case. Mr. Mendicino now is enjoying greater comfort and greater leniency. Meanwhile, his victims are extremely fearful. And when I say victims, obviously he took the lives of his true victims, but he left families, he left parents, he left siblings, he left spouses to grieve the loss. And so when the minister made the decision to allow Mr. Bernardo to be removed from maximum security and placed in medium security, really, I think that's a slap in the face to these loved ones who have been left behind to try to process their grief. Ultimately, he has the opportunity to own this mistake and to reverse course. And so far, he's chosen instead to defend and deflect, to shift blame to his staff members, and ultimately to do nothing. And I think that's really sad.
A recent poll published in the National Post says Canadians of all stripes are simply fed up with the federal government's line on crime and drugs. It says every single demographic that people are really frustrated with Canada's justice system. They say it's far too generous with bail and too lenient on violent criminals. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly. As you mentioned, the vast majority of Canadians believe that our laws are too lenient, that they are far more on the side of the criminal than they are on the side of the victims. That needs to change. And I think, again, this is where I would say this government is abiding by some messed up ideology rather than reality. In what world does it make sense to put Bill C-5 in place, which took place in 2021? Under this bill, the government decreased or became more lenient with regards to violent crime. So, for example, when committing robbery with a firearm, the repercussions for that were downgraded. In addition to that, someone who would kidnap and child traffic, the punishment for that got downgraded. The list goes on and on. There's these heinous crimes that the government determined were not needing to be punished nearly to the extent that they once were, and so they actually became more lenient. Well, now you have criminals who are walking our streets, committing these violent crimes, often in a repetitive nature, and the government is choosing to turn a blind eye. That's wrong. Most Canadians are turning on the news every night and seeing someone who, got on a city bus or was standing on a train platform or walking down the street or sipping coffee at a Starbucks. And Canadians are watching as these individuals are violently attacked on the news. That's an incredibly sad state. And it's the state that we've entered into because we have a government that has refused to put the security and the safety of Canadians in a place of primal importance. And I think that's atrocious.
Many Albertans are not happy with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Just Transition plan, having thousands in our energy sector transition out of oil and gas. You've been very vocal against that. Why would the federal government want to transition out of one of our country's most profitable industries?
Again, great question. So I think with regards to oil and gas sector, here's what we know. We know that, Justin Trudeau's Just Transition will result in about 170,000 direct job losses. So if you take the population of Lethbridge, 170,000 job losses is just about twice our population. So just wiped out, jobless. That's devastating, not only for the industry, not only for our overall economy, but most importantly, it's devastating for those households or those individuals who rely on that income. The second thing that I'll draw people's attention to is the fact that within oil and gas, this is the largest private sector investor when it comes to clean technology. And so make no mistake, this is an industry that is actually for the environment and abiding by the greatest or most stringent rules that exist in the world. And so this really is an industry that is doing us a whole lot of favor and actually not a lot of harm. And so I think we need to celebrate that and own that proudly as a country. And the last thing that I'll leave our audience with is this. This is the industry that also is responsible for pumping billions of dollars into the overall economy, hundreds of millions of dollars into local economies. And what this equates to then is it equates to new ice rinks, new community centers, new swimming pools, new hospitals, new schools. That is the overall result of a thriving energy sector. And so when the government goes after that industry and tries to drive it into the ground, we have to wonder about our future and just how vibrant it is going to be.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, thanks so much for your time today and for joining us from Ottawa.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
Well, hate crimes targeting religious communities in Canada have been on the rise, be it Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, or Christian. So what's behind this concerning trend? We're joined today from Ottawa by Reverend Dr. Andrew Bennett, Faith Communities Program Director at Cardis, which is a nonpartisan Christian think tank. Andrew, you recently co-wrote a report about the rise of religious hate crimes in Canada, and apparently they more than doubled between 2009 and 2021.
We're seeing in particular increase in hate crimes, especially against Catholics. And that was during that whole period when churches were being targeted in the wake of the Kamloops controversy. But then also targets against Jews and Jewish institutions continues to grow. Jews are the most targeted religious group in the country consistently. And when you look at groups that are subject to hate crimes, whether they be different racialized communities or ethnic communities, religious communities, Jews are consistently in the top 3 of the most targeted groups. So that's very concerning. The rise in anti-Semitism in this country is a very concerning thing that we should all be worried about. But particularly the faith communities that can stand beside the Jewish community and support them in solidarity during an increase in anti-Semitic attacks and hate crimes is very concerning. So we should all be very vigilant as Canadians in addressing this, but it also begs the question, why is this happening?
Exactly, and it should be concerning to all Canadians. And so why is this happening? What have you been finding from your research?
Well, it's sometimes hard to draw direct correlations, but we've seen through other research that we've done with the Angus Reid Institute out of Vancouver that people's appreciation of what religious communities do is declining. We see that a growing number of people amongst Canadians that are on the more secular side of the spectrum, so they're either not religious or they're not actively involved in any particular faith community, they tend to be a little bit more hostile to people that are openly religious. And what we found is that amongst the non-religious and those who are sort of less inclined to be engaged in any sort of spiritual activity, they are the most intolerant of different religious communities. They seem to only really want to be tolerant of themselves. But on the other hand, amongst those who are deeply religious and very, very religiously committed, they see all faith communities being of benefit to the country, except for atheists. So it's a bit of a flip, but I think it's interesting to note that the more religious you are, the more tolerant you are of different views and different beliefs. And I think that's something that we need to recover within our society, that we need to be able to see in one another, even amongst people that have very different views, whether those are ideological views, ethical views, moral views, or religious views. We need to recognize that we're all in this together, that we're all citizens together. These are our neighbors. These are the people that we work with, that we go to school with. And they might hold beliefs that are very different from us, but we need to be able to see in them the dignity that they bear as human beings. And these are people just like us, and religious people have a role to play within our society and within our public debates.
I believe you were pointing out that Angus Reid poll, right, that was telling us the proportion of Canadians who see the overall contributions of religion and faith communities is very good, or more good than bad. So that's fallen, what, 38%, from 38% to 31% in 5 years, right, between 2017 and 2022. So that's not a very high percentage of people like in favor of religion, is it?
And I don't know if it's so much people who are in favor of religion. I think part of it is just a lack of awareness, or we might call it an amnesia, around what religious people do. So I think sometimes there's a perception amongst some in our country and in our communities that religious people are sort of part of these exclusive clubs. And what they do in their churches or their synagogues or their mosques or their gurdwaras, it's just for them. When in fact, religious people don't just engage in public worship simply for their own benefit. What happens is that when they engage in public worship in these buildings that dot our communities, they then take that out into the community and seek to live it out in ways that are for the benefit of all citizens. So I think most Canadians know that, if you want to take advantage of a 12-step program, you can go down the street to Sacred Heart Parish because they've got 12-step programs. Or if you want to put your son or daughter into Girl Guides or Boy Scouts, you can go around the corner to Christchurch Anglican. Or if you want to take advantage of maybe an In From the Cold program, if you experience homelessness or you're struggling, you can go to a Gurdwara, a Sikh temple that might have their communal kitchen open that can feed you. So at the very local level, I think many Canadians know that this is what faith communities do, but often when we get up to the level of government, the business community, our cultural institutions, they sometimes forget that this is what religious people do. And so that's an amnesia that we have to address, I think, if we want to ensure that we can have a better understanding of who are religious people and why do they do what they do, why do they believe what they believe.
Have you done any research on why people are against it specifically, in terms of what their viewpoints are?
Well, I think just to go back to something I said earlier, there's the flaw on one side where we have our institutions that have bought into an idea that religion has to be a purely private matter. If you're a religious person, you keep your religion at home or you keep it in the place of worship. You don't bring it into the public square. But someone who's religious, just as someone who's secular, can't just sort of remove their beliefs and what shapes their viewpoints and what shapes their life and how they live their lives simply like by taking a jacket off and putting it back on. Our beliefs are something that deeply shape us as human beings, whether we're talking about religious beliefs or ideological beliefs, moral beliefs, what have you. And so I think what we want is all of us, as we engage the public square, whether that's in the life of the business community or in government or in our schools or universities, we want to be able to bring our whole selves into that community and to be able to contribute based on our deeply held beliefs. Now, of course, we're not going to have those beliefs maybe forefronted all the time, but they certainly inform how we engage with one another and how we speak to one another. So on the one hand, I think our institutions have to do a better job of creating that openness and that space for religious people to engage in public debate, to present their beliefs in the public square, knowing that there's going to be disagreement, and disagreement's okay. At the same time, on the flip side, I think faith communities, religious leaders, people from different religious traditions have not always done a good job at explaining why they believe what they believe. Because many of us who are religious, we have tended to privatize our faith. We've kept it private because we think that's what we have to do. We have forgotten how to explain ourselves and how to say, well, this is who I am. This is what it means to be, in my case, a Ukrainian Catholic. What do I believe? So instead of just saying, I'm opposed to this or I'm in favor of this, I need to be able to express why I am.
Right.
And that's important. And I think our faith communities also need to be opening up more to different other aspects of our civic life, to make sure that our places of worship are open so that people can see what goes on in places of worship as a means of educating, a means of informing, and really working towards a genuine and deep pluralism, diversity that actually includes religious people.
So any thoughts as to what religious leaders can do to change the perception that religion is damaging?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to try and have a better understanding of what people mean by damaging. Is damaging about religion? And religion as a sort of a concept it's a very difficult thing to try and engage. But when we're looking at religious people, and so when we see people in front of us, including our neighbors, maybe our close friends, family members, fellow students who hold a religious tradition and who stand by that religious tradition and believe something very different, we should ask them, why do you believe what you believe? Tell me about your faith. Tell me about what your faith means to you. So we need to do a much better job as a society, I think, to get away from some of the clickbaity approach that we have to engaging one another through social media and so forth, and actually to sit down and have conversations with one another, to be in community with one another, to have people coming into our churches, into our synagogue or other places of worship, to better understand what we believe and to have more of those interactions. I think that's going to be much healthier for us as a society in the long run if we can get to know who we are and who we are as human persons and why we believe certain things. So that's very important. So religious leaders, I think, have to be, we always have to make an effort to welcome people who maybe are curious about what we believe, don't understand what we believe, and to engage them with open arms and to try and explain as best we can who we are. At the same time, on the level of our cultural institutions, the business world, government, there has to be, I think, a greater openness to different forms of religious expression, that people who are religious have something to contribute to our society. And indeed, up until 50 years ago, Canada was a deeply religious country. And there's still a significant portion of the population, depending on how you slice or dice it, roughly 20% of Canadians who are religiously committed. These are people that believe in God, that are attending religious services on a weekly basis, that are reading sacred texts, that want their kids to be educated according to a religious tradition, and so forth. And so that's a pretty significant proportion of the population. And there's another significant portion that are people that are maybe spiritually uncertain. They're not sure exactly what they believe, but they have some encounter with the transcendental. And this is something that's very core to who we are as human persons. And so I think we need to do more, both at the level of faith communities and at the level of our institutions, to speak about why people believe what they believe and what is it that they believe. How does that impact how they engage with others?
Mm-hmm. And perhaps there needs to be more positive media coverage as well, given to how many benefits these religious groups provide for society. So when you think of how many soup kitchens, homeless shelters, all of that you'd mentioned as well, immigrant support programs are all provided by religious groups. So maybe there needs to be more positive messages there.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Mm-hmm. All right. Is there anything that business or educational leaders could do, any steps that they could take to maybe change the way religion is viewed?
Well, we recently did a project a couple of years ago here at Cardis that looked at provincial education curricula. And we looked at public school curricula at the primary and secondary level in British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and Nova Scotia to get a bit of a kind of a bird's eye view across provinces of different sizes, different degrees of ethno-religious, multicultural diversity, and so forth. And what we found is that often religion was simply not discussed at all in public schools. The province of Ontario was probably doing the best job of trying to introduce religious concepts into the classroom. But other provinces, such as British Columbia, simply don't want to speak about it. And given the trends in our country in terms of immigration, we're receiving a lot more immigrants that are coming from deeply religious countries in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and so forth, that come to this country, and we want them to come with everything, all that they bring into our communities, including their religious beliefs. So if you have a primary school where You know, you've got a diversity of people in the classroom, and you've got Johnny sitting next to Fatima who wears a hijab. I'm sure Johnny probably wonders, why does Fatima wear a scarf on her head?
That's a really good point. No, you're absolutely right. So there needs to be that sort of religious, almost appreciation for each other's culture. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not about inculcating a particular religious doctrine in the schools. I think public schools should necessarily have a secular character to them. They should not be advancing any one particular religious tradition. But you're going to have students that are deeply religious. And I think it's important that other students can engage with their classmates in a way that is healthy and in a way in which they can understand, hey, what does it mean for, you know, my friend to be a Muslim or my friend to be a Sikh? And what does that mean in their life? Because then as those young people grow up and take roles in society, they're going to be much more able to have a broad-minded view about religious people.
Awareness,
so
awareness is everything, isn't it? Awareness, absolutely. No, I love that. I really appreciate what you said there. It's too bad we're out of time here, but thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Dr. Andrew Bennett is the Faith Communities Program Director at Cardis. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.